This is a 2018 AMG Mercedes-Benz. It has 600 horsepower. It does 0 to 60 in 3.4 seconds, and it costs just under $120,000. And it's a station wagon. So today I'm going to show you around the 2018 Mercedes-AMG E63S Wagon, which is the most expensive station wagon in history, and also the fastest station wagon in history, and also the coolest station wagon in history. Then again, I might be a little biased. This is my personal car. It's a 2012 E63 AMG wagon. It's basically this car, except 6 years older. Now, if you take a close look at my car, you can see that it is tremendously dirty. It's ridiculously just filthy. And the reason is because I use it all the time, in all circumstances, whenever possible. I've driven this car 7,500 miles in the 7 months that I've owned it, which is quite a bit considering that I work from home. I drive it so much because I just love to drive it, but I don't think you have to own one of these to understand why the E63 AMG wagon is so cool. But just in case you need a little more info to be convinced, here it is. Yes, this is a $120,000 station wagon, but remember, like I said before, it's also a 600 horsepower station wagon, courtesy of a twin-turbo V8 up front. It also does 0 to 60 in 3.4 seconds, like I said, thanks to the V8 and a quick-shifting 9-speed automatic transmission and standard all-wheel drive. And this is all packed into a regular family hauler station wagon, which makes this thing extra ridiculous. So today I've borrowed this 2018 AMG E63S Wagon from a viewer here in Maryland, and I'm going to show you around it and show you all of its interesting quirks and cool features, and then I'm going to get it out on the road, which I'm very excited about because, frankly, I really want one of these, and then I'm going to give it a Doug score. And for more of my thoughts on the new AMG wagon, click the link below to visit autotrader.com/oversteer, where I've also compiled a list of the coolest wagons currently listed for sale on AutoTrader. I'm going to start under the hood, where you'll find a couple of interesting quirks about this car. For example, like all AMG models, this one has a little plaque under the hood that tells you the name of the person who hand-built your engine. I really like that. It gives you sort of a personal connection with the actual maker of the car. For example, look at this plaque, and you can clearly tell the name of the person who built this engine was Pero Garajo. Anyway, moving on, I always like that Mercedes-Benz warning label that reminds you not to do any engine work if you're wearing a tie. Thank you, Mercedes-Benz. That's a good tip. Also, take a look at the oil cap. You know how cars used to recommend Castrol Synthetic or Mobil 1? Well, this thing says you got to get Mercedes-Benz oil, not just your regular generic oil, Mercedes-Benz oil. And I'm guessing they don't sell that at Pep Boys for $9.99 a bottle. Next up, we move on to the headlights. Now, all automakers now have these ultra complicated headlights in their cars with all sorts of different lighting types, and they say things like intelligent headlight. But have you ever seen one where when you put the turn signal on, the name of the car brand actually lights up as the turn signal flashes? Every time you put on your turn signal in this car, it just reminds BMW drivers that they're inferior. And by the way, speaking of ridiculously complicated headlights, take a look at these things when they're on, and look closely in there. Look at those little blue streaks inside the headlight when it's on. I have no idea what those things do, except add insane complication. It almost looks like the human eyeball. I can only imagine what one of these headlights would cost to replace at your friendly Mercedes-Benz retailer. Next up, we move on to the wheels. Now, with a quick glance at these wheels, you don't really see any lug nuts. They kind of look like center lock wheels, like you'd find in a really high-end sports car like a 911 Turbo or a Carrera GT, but that's a fake. Take a look at this. Walk up to the wheel, twist the little Mercedes logo in the center, and then the entire center cap pulls off. It's a larger part than you would have realized, and it reveals the lug nuts are hidden behind it. It's a little visual trick, but I will say when those caps are installed, they do make the wheel look pretty cool. Next up, we move on to the little fender badge on the side of the front fenders. Now, on my car, it says V8 bi-turbo, since I have a bi-turbo V8. V8. On this car, it says V8 bi-turbo 4MATIC, since this one is all-wheel drive, but it doesn't stop there. Take a close look. There's a little red plus sign next to the 4MATIC badge, just so this car can assert its dominance over mine just a little bit more. Next up, we move on to the taillights, which are some of the coolest in the entire car industry right now. Not too many people know this, but the regular E-Wagon has these too. It's not just regular taillights, they have like little red taillight glitter specks in there. It just looks really cool. Even when the taillight is off, if you look closely at it, it's one of the most distinctive taillights in the car industry. Next up, we move on to the badging on the back of this car. Now, on the old AMG models like mine, you'll notice that it says E63 on this side and AMG on the other side. Well, they've changed that in the last couple of years. The cars are no longer called Mercedes-Benz E63 AMG. Now they're calling it Mercedes-AMG E63, and the Benz is just gone. The back of the cars is updated to reflect that too. AMG is first, and then the model name of the vehicle. I think the whole point was to sort of emphasize the AMG brand a little bit more. Another interesting item in the exterior of this car, something kind of crazy. Take a look around the rear hatch area. You notice you don't really see a backup camera. Above the license plate, below the rear spoiler by the third brake light, backup camera isn't there. That's because the backup camera in this car is hidden until you shift into reverse or until you turn on the backup camera. Then it drops down from the area right above the license plate so it can be a camera and show you what you need to see. When you're going again, when you don't need the camera, it retracts back up and into the tailgate so it's hidden. Now, I review a lot of cars and I haven't seen this feature on any other new car, although I'm told that some other new Mercedes models also have it. Some people will look at this and say, well, it's just another thing that's going to break, and that's true, but I have to admit it does kind of clean up the look of the rear of the car, and of course it also keeps the camera from getting dirty or damaged when it's not in use. And speaking of things that retract and extend automatically, the fuel door. Walk up to the fuel door, tap it, and it automatically opens right up for you. And no, that's not just a mechanical lever. There is actually an electronic release. You can hear it and see it. Take a closer look. Folks, we're in a brave new world where you can't even open your fuel door without a little bit of electronic assistance. Next up, since I'm already around back, I might as well move on to this car's coolest party trick, aside from its 600 horsepower, and that would be the fact that it has 600 horsepower and a cargo area. The cargo area back here is absolutely massive. It isn't particularly interesting or unusual in any way, except there are a couple of quirks, one of which is the fact that just like in all these new luxury SUVs, you don't have to fumble with any latches in order to put the rear seats down. All you got to do is just tap a little button in the cargo area. It looks just like the power window button, and then the seats automatically fold down on one side. Tap the same button on the other side, and then the other side seats fold down. It's pretty simple. Now, of course, when you put the seats down, you can also remove that cargo cover you see in the back, but I'm not going to do that. I think that's obvious to anyone who's ever had or been around a hatchback or a station wagon. Less obvious, maybe, is the Mercedes-Benz first aid kit. Now, I've made fun of the Mercedes-Benz first aid kit before, so I'm not going to go through all of the little pieces, but I did find a little table of contents in this particular one, and one of the contents listed is survival wrap emergency blanket, which kind of surprised me. There's an emergency blanket in here. So I started pawing around and looking at everything, and yes, there is a survival wrap emergency blanket that claims to be 52 inches by 84 inches when unfurled. That's 4.5 feet by 7 feet in this thing. I don't know what kind of blanket it is or whether it's actually effective, but it's here. Next up, moving on to the rear seats, I'm happy to report that even back here, you can drop the rear seats with the push of a button. It's the same exact button in the cargo area. Push it, and the seats fall right down automatically. Next up, climbing into the back seat, there are a couple of interesting quirks back here. I'm going to start with this center armrest. It actually isn't really all that interesting, but it does have a couple of quirks. For example, you open it up and there is a little bit of storage in there. Not particularly unusual. What is kind of unusual is the fact that it has individual cup holders. So if you're sitting back here and you need a place to store your drink, you can pop open just your cup holder and put your drink in it, and you don't have to look at the unsightly other empty cup holder. Mercedes-Benz has made sure of that. Also interesting in the back seat is the speakers on the door. Now, it has become like this race in the car industry to have as many speakers as possible. There's automakers coming out with like 24 and 28 speaker stereo systems. It's insane. And when you get in this car, you can kind of figure out how they're doing that. Take a look at the speakers on the door. There's one speaker, and then next to it, There's another smaller speaker. It's like automakers are running out of places to put speakers. They're like, we got one on the door. Where should we put another one? I got it right next to that first one on the door. And speaking of that center armrest, if you want to put that center armrest back up because you want to put someone in this seat, one cool thing about this car is the center seat belt is very easy to find. It's because it always has a permanent home sort of right in the middle of the center seat. It just lives there and it doesn't get dug into the middle of the seat, so you can't find it when you go to put on your seat belt, which is always tremendously frustrating. Next up, now I'm finally in the front of this car. This is where all the cool stuff is. Before we get to that, a little look at the Windows sticker. Now, the MSRP of this car is right around $115,000, and add a few more options, you can easily get well over $120,000 and up to $130,000 for a station wagon. Quite possibly the most interesting option in this car is the one that says increased cabin insulation with acoustic and heat absorbing membrane. That's an option in this car, and this one has it. You know the #1 sign you're driving around in an expensive luxury car? When it has a heat absorbing membrane. Yeah, your Chevy Sonic doesn't have one of those. And next we move on to the front door panel. Now the door panel is nice, it's high quality, blah, 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 but the door panel also has one insane and ridiculous feature. Now if you take a look above the little seat controls, you will see controls for the heated seat and the cooled seat, and you'll also see a control that says R. Now if you press that, then you have the ability in the driver's seat to move the front passenger seat. So when R is pushed, it means you're controlling the right seat and you can move it forward or backwards. You can move the backrest, you can even move the headrest. You could really annoy your front passenger with this ability. In fact, you could also annoy your rear passengers because you can move the front passenger seat all the way back and steal all their legroom if you want to. You could really smush someone. But that isn't the coolest thing about this feature. You can also control the heated and cooled abilities of the front passenger seat. Press R and then press the heat button for the driver's seat. It doesn't do anything. That's because it's lighting up over on the passenger seat. You're turning on the passenger seat's heating and cooling. I guess the theory here is maybe if the passenger gets out and forgot to turn off their heating, you then don't have to reach all the way across. It seems like kind of an excessive feature, but that's kind of the point of this car. Next up in the front seat, we move on to the sun visor, which has a couple of interesting components. One is that if you put the sun visor down and then push it over to the window side, if the sun is on your left, there's an auxiliary sun visor that you can push down in the normal place. So you can have sun visors both in front and on the side. Not a lot of cars have that, although some do. What most cars don't have, though, is when you put down the sun visor on the driver's side and open up the little vanity mirror, on the inside of the cover for the vanity mirror is the Mercedes-Benz roadside assistance telephone number. I've never seen that in any other car before, but it's there. The next interesting thing up front here is the engine starter button. For some reason, in modern luxury cars, there's this like race to make weirder or more distinctive engine starter buttons. BMW is using this like steampunk font on theirs. Mercedes-Benz has adopted this like weird hippie image of the sun. I don't know why you can't just do a start-stop button, but I guess in today's luxury car world, everything has to be a little bit unique. For further proof of that, take a look at the dome light panel directly above the driver and passenger seats on the ceiling in this car. It isn't just your typical dome light. Instead, it's like 5 different individual square lights that all sort of have their own cool look to them. You can't just get away with regular dome lights anymore. You got to have cool, weird things like that. Now, in the middle of this car, in the center console, you will find a little storage area. First off, on top of that storage area, it doesn't say Mercedes-Benz, it says AMG. You have a cooler center console lid than the regular E-Class if you get the AMG. Open it up and you'll find the cup holders. In one of the cup holders is the ashtray. They're done with just giving you ashtrays. Now you have sort of a cup holder ashtray, and you can get rid of it if you don't smoke. If you do smoke, you'll notice that ashtray has the Mercedes-Benz logo on it. Only the finest ashtrays for AMG wagon customers. Next up, moving back to the ceiling of this car by the dome light, I want to talk about the sunroof. Now, like a lot of these luxury wagons and SUVs, this car has a panoramic sunroof. One interesting thing about this particular sunroof is that the cover for the panoramic roof is actually split into 2 pieces, and when you open it, they both open to the same spot, which is directly in the middle. The front one opens back and the back one opens forward, and then the the covers are off, and you can look through the sunroof and see the sun. And next up, we move on to all of the crazy tech features in the screens. I say screens because there are two of them. They're identically sized and they're next to each other. There's the one center infotainment screen, and then there's the screen on the left, which is like the gauge cluster. Now, I'm going to start with the gauge cluster screen, and specifically manual mode. You push a little button down here in the center to engage manual mode, and when you do that, the red line doubles in size because they think you're an idiot and they want you to be able to see the red line. Now, more on the gauge cluster screen. The gauge cluster screen is crazy. It's all adjustable on the steering wheel, and it's not just like a little wheel you use to adjust it. Instead, it's this little capacitive touch pad. You sort of run your thumb over it and it adjusts. Now, the cool thing about it is it outlines in blue what you're adjusting, so you can sort of switch between the thing in the middle or the screen on the right. Now, when you put the blue outline over the middle part of the screen, you'll find that most of the stuff is pretty standard trip computer type stuff, not all that unusual, although I do like the Eco Display mode. If you look at Eco Display, you can see at the bottom there's the scales of justice. I think the intent is to get you to drive more efficiently, and then maybe the scales of justice turn green or something like that. It's a little bit dramatic for just fuel efficient driving. Also, one other item worth noting in the gauge cluster, at the top you can see there's a little piston, and then there's the number 8. That's because this car has cylinder deactivation. On the highway, if you're just sort of cruising along, it'll shut off 4 cylinders in order to save fuel. A lot of cars do that. That's not all that interesting, but the cool thing is right now it's in 8-cylinder mode. When you're in 4-cylinder mode, that little piston and the 8 turns into a 4 to let you know that it's saving fuel. Now, beyond the drive modes, another crazy thing in that center screen is the camera stuff. I already showed you that the camera sort of unfurls itself in the back, but the camera stuff goes way beyond just the camera appearing out of nowhere in the tailgate. To start off, you can see there's a regular backup camera, good quality, but nothing else interesting. Then there's a 360-degree top-down camera, also cool, but not unique. But check this out. These two cameras show you top-down views of the sides of your car so you don't scrape the wheels on curbs. And this camera is a wide-angle wraparound view. My car is visible even though it's parked directly next to the new AMG wagon. Of course, it also has the same wraparound view in front, meaning there are 6 different camera views in this car. You have better visibility in this thing than in a submarine. Now, before I go any further in the center screen, I want to tell you how to use it. This isn't a touchscreen. Instead, it has one of my favorite center screen operation features in the entire car industry. Now, you have a couple of options. You can use, for example, in the center console, the wheel. And the wheel you can sort of turn and scroll between things. And then there's a back button and a home button. Or you don't want to use the wheel, that's fine. You can use the pad that sits right above the wheel. You can also use that to scroll through things, and there's a back button and there's a home button. Or let's say you're not a wheel person and you're not a pad person. Well, there's another one of those little capacitive touch things on the steering wheel, and you can use that to scroll through things. The one on the right on the steering wheel controls the center screen, the one on the left controls the gauge cluster screen, and guess what? That pad also has a back button and a home button, meaning that you can control that center screen from 3 different places with 3 different redundant controls. I suspect they did this because people complained, well, I don't like the wheel. Then people complained, well, I don't like the pad. Well, I'd rather control it with the steering wheel. And Mercedes was just like, fine, you can have whatever you want, you annoying customers. Now, next up, we move into one of my favorite infotainment system things, the settings. We'll start with some of the weird pictures Mercedes uses for things. This one is normal, but look at this. Go to track pace mode, and it shows the E63 wagon on a racetrack with the Nürburgring lap time in the corner, just to remind you that you're driving a cool station wagon. I also like the picture for assistance. There are little lines swirling around the car like some sort of divine power is assisting you. But anyway, back to track pace mode, the thing with the Nürburgring lap time. It has some cool features, as you might expect, considering when you click on it, there's a sunset and it says, warning, use this on racetracks only. Just what are those cool features? Well, go to track race and it'll record your lap times, or go into drag race and it'll record your acceleration runs. Click on quarter mile, for instance, and it actually gives you a Christmas tree like you'd see at a drag strip. One of the things I really like is if you go into info, it tells you regular stuff like software version, but it also gives you your build number and it shows you how many drag races you've done. To me, the cool thing about all this drag race stuff is it's in this car. We've seen all this in SRT Chryslers and Dodges, but this is a proper $120,000 Mercedes luxury car that'll keep track of your drag races. Maybe the coolest thing in the infotainment settings, though, is the interior lighting colors. Some cars let you choose blue or red or whatever. This thing gives you 63 different interior color choices, including every shade you can possibly think of. Look how similar all these greens are, and yet you can choose the particular green that perfectly suits your tastes. For even more personalization, check this out. You can decide exactly how bright your new color choice is on the display in front and in back, down to the exact percentage of brightness. And if that wasn't cool enough, how about this? You can see the colors change in real time as you scroll through your color choices. I've sped up this footage, but you get the idea. These colors actually do change immediately and at the precise whim of the driver. And if the colors weren't enough, check this out. You can select between a few predetermined patterns like red moon and purple sky, and at the very bottom, there's color flash and color mix. A couple of other interesting things. You can also use the infotainment system to choose the design of the gauge cluster screen. There's sport or classic or progressive, which is odd. It's, I guess, what Bernie Sanders' choice would have been if he had an AMG wagon. Here's what sport looks like. It emphasizes the tachometer right in the middle. Also interesting, you can go into the parking assist settings and decide if you want to check warn early, which seems odd to me. Who would uncheck that? Of course you want park assist to warn early with a sound before you reverse your AMG wagon into something. And speaking of sound coming from the rear, let's finish off this tour with the AMG wagon's exhaust note. And so, those are all the cool quirks and features of the 2018 AMG wagon. Now it's time to get this thing out on the road and see how it drives. All right, driving the AMG wagon. I've been very excited about this. My general feeling is that if I were to have a lottery win, the first thing I would do is I would run out to my dealership and I'd buy one of these, assuming I could find one in a dealer. These are not common. Most dealers are not ordering them for stock. They're generally special order only. Most people in the States get the sedan. My body style, they only made about 220 of the wagons. This body style, I imagine, will probably be pretty similar. These things aren't exactly shooting up in popularity, but they should be. Man, the handling, it's much sharper than mine. Oh, I want this one already. I've only been driving for 4 minutes and I already want it. Oh, the transmission is much quicker. One of my other complaints about my car is that the transmission is a little bit slow to shift. This thing is fast, fast, fast. Transmission is not only fast, but very smooth. Even though I'm in sport mode, you'd think the shifts would smash you back and that kind of thing. They don't. The pedals are excellent. They feel great. That exhaust sounds great. The owner told me he skipped the sport exhaust. I thought it was kind of overkill, but even just the regular AMG exhaust, you don't need much more than that. Wow. Oh, I love the sound. I love how tight it feels. I mean, I think I like to drive my car in the rain, on the highway. I can go fast and just so planted and stable. This thing feels like it's on the next level of planted and stable. I also like the fact that, like, I'm in sport mode in the neighborhood and it's not so tight. So many cars, you get in sport mode and you're in sort of like a low speed situation, the transmission bucks, and that's the case with my AMG wagon. Not this one. All right, I got an open straightaway here. Oh, I want this car so much. The mid-range acceleration is just incredible. I'm going 50 and I come over a hill and I can see then, you know, the road is empty and I floor it and the car just takes off. There are people who oh, the wagon? You got a wagon? But how do you drive this and not just laugh and think it's so hilarious? I mean, this is ridiculous. The seat is tremendously comfortable. Transmission is nice and smooth. The ride quality is smoother than my car, there's no doubt. You know, it's kind of funny. I drive my car and I'm like, well, how could they improve this? I mean, this is great. It's so wonderful. It's only 5 years old and it's got all this stuff, active seat bolsters. Well, here's how they can improve it. This car feels better in every single way. One of the things that I like about this car is how subtle it is. I really like the idea that kind of nobody really knows that you're driving, you know, this incredible 600 horsepower monster. Oh, and how good it feels through corners. There is zero body roll. The steering is tremendously predictable, incredibly precise, not like an exotic sports car or anything like that, not even like a Porsche, but really good. It makes you just feel very confident. Everything is just working together so well. The transmission is incredibly good. The steering is incredibly good. I pull the paddle, it feels good. Then it shifts incredibly fast. The sound is good. And most importantly, the feeling of everything is good. I mean, this is it. This is what you're looking for. So that's the 2018 Mercedes-AMG E63S Wagon, which is a long name that you can basically summarize as the craziest, coolest station wagon ever. You know, I know some people don't really get fast wagons, but to me there's something cool about a car that is ridiculously fast and ridiculously practical. A car that can carry more stuff than a Ford Escape while outrunning a Ferrari California. And no car does it better than this one. And now it's time for the Doug score. Starting with the weekend categories and styling, the AMG Wagon is an attractive car, but not some gorgeous, daring, exotic sports car, and it gets a 7 out of 10. Next up is acceleration. It does 0 to 60 in 3.3 seconds, which gives it a 9 out of 10 on the Doug score acceleration scale. Then there's handling. The E63 Wagon is the best handling wagon I've ever driven, but it stops short of ultra-precise exotics and sports cars, and it gets a 7 out of 10. Cool factor is undeniable. This thing is ultra cool, and most true car people would excitedly snap a photo if they saw one on the street and send it to their friends. It's harmed only by the fact that most non-car people have no idea what it is, and it gets a 7 out of 10. As for importance, it's a cool car, but not a significant supercar you'd put in a museum or anything, and it gets a 6 out of 10. That brings the total weekend score to 36 out of 50, which is a strong showing and has the highest weekend score of any four-door car, and it's tied with the Ferrari GTC4 Lusso, which is actually a competitor, except that the Lusso costs twice as much. Next, we move on to the daily category, starting with features. The AMG Wagon has all the latest tech and some of the most advanced self-driving capabilities on the market, and it gets a 9 out of 10. Comfort is good. It's better than my wagon, but not on the level of a Rolls-Royce or a Bentley, and it earns a 7 out of 10. Quality is very high. If we were going just based on materials, it would get a perfect score, but we have to factor in reliability, and let's be honest, all those screens and tech features are going to be a problem in about a decade, and it gets a 7 out of 10. Next up is practicality. The wagon has 64.3 cubic feet of cargo space, which should give it a 9, but I'm dropping this down to an 8 out of 10 because the most practical cars of this ilk get at least 10 miles per gallon better on the highway. Finally, there's value. This car promises a lot and delivers a lot, but it's still a station wagon that costs $120,000, and the fact that my 5-year-old version cost me only $45,000 suggests this is going to lose a lot of value fast, meaning I can only give it a 6 out of 10. Still, that means it gets a 37 out of 50, placing it near the very top of my daily scores. Add it all together and the Doug score is 73 out of 100. That ties it with the Porsche 918 Spyder for the highest Doug score ever. Accuse me of bias all you want, but I don't really know where I can deduct points from the AMG Wagon to lower its score. It's quicker than a Carrera GT, it has some of the top self-driving tech on the market and a lot of other cool tech, and it carries more stuff than the Range Rover Velar I filmed last week. And oh yeah, it has all-wheel drive so you can use it year-round. The AMG Wagon does nothing perfectly, but a lot of things great, and it's quite simply the most well-rounded car in the entire car industry. I just wish I could afford to buy one for myself.